The morning Sylvie married Hugh Whitmore, the sky over Boston was the color of old pewter, and she told herself that was fine. She had never been the kind of woman who needed a pretty sky. The ceremony was at 10. By 1:30 it was finished. By noon, Hugh was gone. Not gone in the way a husband leaves for the office, or steps out to speak with a solicitor. Gone in the way a man leaves when he has done something he cannot face. He shook her hand at the church door. Her hand, not her waist, not her cheek, and said the carriage would take her to Ashwell. His man would have the keys. He would follow when he could. He did not say when that would be. Sylvie stood on the church steps in her mother's altered dress and watched the second carriage roll away with her husband inside it. The small crowd that had gathered, his business associates, a cousin she did not know, two women who looked relieved, dispersed quickly, the way people do when a thing is over and there is nothing left to witness. She did not cry. She had been warned, in the indirect way women of her circumstances were warned about things, that Hugh Whitmore was not an easy man. Her father had said he was serious. Her aunt had said he had suffered. What they had not said, what no one had said outright, was that he had arranged this marriage the way a man arranges a business contract, efficiently, without sentiment, and with no intention of being present for any of it. The carriage to Ashwell took 2 hours. Sylvie spent them watching the landscape change from the packed streets of the city to open road, bare fields, stone walls going gray in the November cold. She had a small trunk in the boot and a letter in her coat pocket that she had not opened yet. It had been placed in her hand by Hugh's solicitor that morning, before the ceremony, with the instruction that it was from the estate's caretaker and contained necessary information about the property. She opened it now. The letter was 3 paragraphs. The first explained that the estate, Ashwell, had been largely unoccupied for 4 years. The second listed the staff currently in residence. 1 housekeeper, Mrs. Tilley, and 1 groundskeeper, a man named Baxter, who was also responsible for the horses. The third paragraph noted that additional staff had not yet been engaged, and that Mrs. Whitmore should direct any questions about household accounts to Mr. Aldgate, at Aldgate & Sons in Gloucester, who managed the property on Mr. Whitmore's behalf. Sylvie read the letter twice. Then she folded it back into her pocket and looked out the window again. 4 years unoccupied. 2 staff, an accounts firm she had never heard of. She was 24 years old. She had grown up in a house where her mother kept the books herself, at the kitchen table, every Sunday evening, because her father was brilliant with ideas and disastrous with money. And someone had to know where everything stood. Sylvie had sat beside her mother at that table for as long as she could remember, first drawing pictures in the margins of old ledger pages, then learning to add columns, then learning to read what the columns meant. She had not expected that this would be useful. She was beginning to think it might be. Ashwell came into view just before 4 o'clock. The gate was iron, set into a stone wall that stretched in both directions as far as she could see. The lane beyond it was lined with elms that had gone bare for the season, and at the end of the lane sat a large stone house that had once been handsome, and was now merely large. Mrs. Tilley was waiting at the door. She was a small woman, somewhere past 60, with the particular stillness of someone who had been waiting in place for a very long time and had stopped expecting anything to arrive. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said. "Mrs. Tilley." Inside, the house was cold and dim and smelled faintly of damp. The front hall had a floor of black and white marble that had not been polished in what appeared to be years. The chandelier above held candles, not gas. The curtains in the front parlor, Sylvie could see them through the open door, were drawn against the light. Mrs. Tilley showed her through the main rooms without comment, the parlor, the dining room, the library, the back sitting room that opened onto the garden. Every surface was dusty. Not abandoned dusty, not collapsed and forgotten dusty, but the particular dust that settles on things that are cleaned occasionally and never properly used. The house had been maintained in the way a man maintains something he cannot bring himself to sell, but also cannot bring himself to come back to. "Has Mr. Whitmore been here recently?" Sylvie asked. "Not since the spring," Mrs. Tilley said. "Before that, not since the previous autumn." Sylvie nodded. She kept her face arranged. Her room was on the 2nd floor. It had a fireplace, which Mrs. Tilley lit, and a window that looked out over what had once been a formal garden, and was now something between a garden and a meadow. The beds were visible but overgrown. A stone path ran through the center of it, disappearing into a stand of old apple trees at the far end. That night, Sylvie ate alone at a table that seated 14 and tried to think clearly. She had married Hugh Whitmore because her father's situation had become impossible. Not scandalous. Nothing as dramatic as scandal. Simply impossible, in the quiet way that debt becomes impossible when it is allowed to grow for long enough. Hugh had offered a settlement that cleared everything, and asked for nothing in return except a wife. Her father had accepted. Sylvie had agreed, because she understood the mathematics of it and because she had decided, somewhere in the weeks between the arrangement and the ceremony, that she would not spend her life resenting a choice she had made with open eyes. She did not know why Hugh had needed a wife. She did not know what he had suffered that had made him the kind of man who shook his wife's hand at the church door and drove away. She did not know why Ashwell had stood half empty for 4 years. But she was here now, and the house needed attention. She started with the books, not the housekeeping ledger, though she found that too, in a drawer of Mrs. Tilley's sitting room, and went through it carefully on the second evening. She started with the estate accounts, the records of income and expenditure that Aldgate and Sons had presumably been maintaining, which she wrote to request on her third day at Ashwell, in a letter addressed to Mr. Aldgate personally, noting that she was Mr. Whitmore's wife and was now in residence, and wished to understand the state of the property. Mr. Aldgate's response came in 4 days. It was polite and slightly condescending, in the way that men's letters to women on financial subjects tended to be, and it enclosed 3 pages of summary accounts that told her very little. Income from the 2 tenant farms on the eastern edge of the property. Maintenance costs. The management fee for Aldgate and Sons. She looked at the management fee for a long time. It was larger than she would have expected. Not outrageously so, not in a way that would announce itself as wrong. Just slightly, persistently too large for an estate that was largely unoccupied and had only 2 staff. She wrote back. She asked for the original receipts. Mr. Aldgate wrote again. He explained that the records were voluminous and perhaps unnecessary for her purposes. He suggested she discuss any concerns with Mr. Whitmore directly when he next visited. He remained, sincerely her obedient servant. Sylvie set his letter down on the desk in the library, which she had claimed as her working space, and looked out the window at the bare elms. She was not going to discuss anything with Hugh Whitmore when he next visited, because she had no way of knowing when that would be, and because she was not in the habit of waiting for permission to understand things she was capable of understanding herself. She wrote a third letter. This one went not to Mr. Aldgate but to the county records office, requesting any publicly filed documents related to the Ashwell estate accounts from the past 5 years. In the meantime, she cleaned. Not because it was her job, though she supposed it was, now, but because the house needed it, and because she found that physical work helped her think. She and Mrs. Tilley worked through the ground floor together over the first 2 weeks, beating rugs, washing windows, airing curtains. Baxter repaired the gate latch and the broken step at the garden entrance, and several sections of the stone wall that had begun to give way. Sylvie spent her afternoons in the garden with pruning shears, cutting back what had overgrown and turning soil in the beds that looked salvageable. She learned from Mrs. Tilley, gradually, in the way information comes when you are patient and present and do not ask too many questions at once. Hugh had married before. His first wife, a woman named Cecilia, had died 3 years ago. Not at Ashwell. She had been ill for the last year of her life, and they had been in the city, close to the doctors. Ashwell was where they had spent the early years of their marriage, the good years, before things went wrong. Hugh had not come back after the funeral. The management of the estate had been passed to Aldgate and Sons, who had been Cecilia's family solicitors, and Hugh had not looked closely at the accounts since. Sylvie sat with that for a long time. She was not jealous of a dead woman. She did not know how to be jealous of grief. But she understood something now that she had not understood before. Ashwell was not simply a house Hugh had neglected. It was a house he had loved once, with someone else, and he had handed it to someone else to manage because he could not bring himself to look at it. She went back to the garden the next morning. She planted bulbs in the south bed, tulips, mostly, with some allium and a handful of crocuses near the path. The ground was cold and the work was hard, and she was not entirely sure why she was doing it, except that the bed had been someone's garden once, and it deserved to be a garden again. The records from the county office arrived in late November. Sylvie spread them across the library desk on a Tuesday afternoon, and went through them over 3 hours, with a cup of tea that went cold beside her. What she found was not dramatic. It was not a single obvious fraud. It was, instead, a pattern. Small and consistent, and accumulated over time in the way that small things accumulate when no one is watching. The management fee had increased twice in 4 years, without any corresponding change in the scope of services. There were payments to a maintenance contractor, a firm called Rowe & Partners, that appeared in the Aldgate accounts, but did not appear in any county record she could find. The tenant farm income was recorded at a figure that, When she calculated it against the acreage and the prevailing rates she found in a copy of the Agricultural Almanac from the Ashwell Library, was approximately 15% lower than it should have been. None of this was conclusive. She knew that. She was not a solicitor. She could not prove, from what she had, that anyone had deliberately done anything wrong. But she could write a very clear letter. She wrote it that evening. It went to Hugh, not to Aldgate, and it was 4 pages long. She laid out what she had found, step by step, without accusation and without drama. The fee increases, the contractor payments with no corresponding records, the tenant income discrepancy. She explained how she had arrived at each figure. She said she could be wrong, that there might be explanations she was not aware of, and that she would welcome any clarification he could provide. She said she was not writing to alarm him, but because she thought he would want to know. She did not say, "While you have been absent from this house that you are too sad to look at, the people you trusted to manage it have been quietly taking from you for years." She did not say it, but it was there between every line. She sealed the letter, gave it to Baxter to post in the morning, and went to bed. Hugh arrived on a Thursday 17 days later, no advance notice. Sylvie heard the carriage on the lane at just past 2 in the afternoon, and went to the window of the library and watched it come. She went to the front hall to meet him. She did not rush. He was taller than she remembered, or perhaps the church had made him seem smaller. He looked at the floor of the front hall, the polished floor, the chandelier with new candles, the curtains in the parlor drawn back to show the winter light, and something moved across his face that she could not read. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Whitmore." She paused. "The sitting room is warm." They sat across from each other in the back sitting room with the garden in view through the window, and he did not speak for a long moment. He was looking at the garden. "The south bed," he said finally. "I planted bulbs. They'll come up in March, if the frost doesn't go too deep." He looked at her. It was the longest he had looked at her since the church, and she made herself hold it. "Your letter," he said. "Yes, you found all of that yourself. I asked for the accounts. When Mr. Aldgate was not forthcoming with the originals, I requested the county records instead." He was quiet again. Then, "Why?" It was not quite a question. "Because I'm here," Sylvie said. "Because this is my home now and I wanted to understand it." He looked back at the garden. She watched him, the line of his shoulders, the particular tension of a man who is trying to hold something together from the inside. "Cecilia chose Aldgate," he said. "Her family used them for years. I trusted them because she had." "I know." She said it simply, without softness and without edge. "I found that out from Mrs. Tilley." A beat of silence. "What do you intend to do?" "That depends on you. It's your estate. But I can tell you what I would do." He looked at her again. "What would you do?" "I would request a full accounting from Aldgate, in writing, with originals. I would have that accounting reviewed by a solicitor of your choosing, not one connected to Cecilia's family. If the discrepancies hold, and I believe they will, I would terminate the agreement with Aldgate and engage someone new to manage the property, ideally someone local who can be overseen in person." She paused. "I would also check the lease terms with the tenant farmers. They may not know their rents have been reported incorrectly, or they may know and have been told it was necessary. Either way, it should be set right." Hugh looked at her for a long moment. She had the odd sense that he was seeing her clearly for the first time since they had met, which had been exactly 3 times before the wedding. "You've done all of this in a month," he said. "I've had time." Something shifted in him then. She could not have named it exactly, but it was there. Some slight loosening of the thing he carried, some small change in the angle of his attention. He was not, she thought, a cold man. He was a man who had gone cold, because cold was what he had decided was safest. It was a different thing. "The south bed," he said again. He was looking at the garden. "Cecilia planted tulips there, years ago." "I didn't know," Sylvie said. It was true. She had planted tulips because tulips had been what the nursery had, and because they came up reliably in difficult soil. "I can plant something else in the spring, if you'd prefer." He shook his head. "No." A pause. "No, it's good. It's right that they should come back." He stayed at Ashwell for 4 days that first visit. He met with Baxter about the wall and the stable roof, which needed attention. He went through the library, and found several things to send to the city, and several more he left where they were. On the last evening, he sat across from Sylvie at the dining table. She had said nothing about the oddness of setting a table that long for 2 people, and she would continue to say nothing, and he told her, in pieces, without quite looking at her, what the last 3 years had been. Cecilia had been ill for 14 months before she died. They had known early on that she would not recover. He had spent those months doing what you do when you know, staying close, managing fear, trying to make the remaining time good. When it was over, he had not known what to do with himself. He was not, he said, someone who talked about such things. He had married again because it had seemed like the practical thing, the next step thing, and because his mother had said it was time, and because he had not had the energy to argue. He did not say, "I am sorry for how I left you." He was not, she thought, someone who said that kind of thing easily. But he had come. He had sat across the table from her and told her about Cecilia, and that was not nothing. He went back to Boston after 4 days. He came again 3 weeks later, and again 2 weeks after that. Each visit, the house was a little more itself. The chandelier was rewired for gas. The kitchen garden had been turned and mulched for spring. The south bed sat dark and waiting, bulbs underground, doing what bulbs do. The business with Aldgate took 2 months to unwind. Hugh engaged a solicitor named Farwell, a dry and precise man, who seemed to find the whole matter less surprising than Sylvie might have expected, which told her something about Mr. Aldgate that she had suspected. In the end, the discrepancies she had identified were confirmed and then exceeded. There were others she had not found, predating the records available to her, going back almost to the beginning of the arrangement. The contractor Rowe and Partners did not appear to exist in any county registry. The tenant income had been shaved in a way that was almost artful. Farwell said it was one of the cleaner versions of this kind of thing he had seen. He said it in a tone that managed to be both complimentary and deeply unpleasant. Hugh thanked him without warmth and wrote the checks that ended it. The night Farwell confirmed the final numbers, Hugh came to find Sylvie in the library. She was working through the spring household accounts, which she had taken over from Mrs. Tilley. With Mrs. Tilley's relief, not her resentment, which mattered. He stood in the doorway for a moment before she heard him. She looked up. "Farwell's done," he said. "I heard the carriage leave." He came into the room and sat down across from her, in the leather chair he had begun to use in the evenings, and he was quiet for a moment in the way he was often quiet. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he was deciding whether to say it. "You found something I should have found years ago," he said. "You were managing other things." "I wasn't managing anything. I was hiding." He said it plainly, without self-pity, which was perhaps the most honest thing she had heard him say. "I handed the estate to strangers and closed my eyes because opening them was too much. And they took advantage of that." A pause. "You didn't let them take advantage of you." "I'm harder to take advantage of," Sylvie said. She meant it lightly, but it came out with more weight than she intended. He looked at her. Something in his face was different. Not soft, not yet, but open in a way it had not been before. Like a window someone had finally remembered to unlatch. "Why did you stay?" he said. "That first month. You could have written to your father. You could have made my life very difficult, and I would have deserved it." She thought about this. It deserved a real answer. "I didn't come here expecting anything from you," she said finally. "I knew what this was, and when I looked at the house I thought, it's a good house. It just needs someone to be present in it, someone who isn't waiting for it to hurt less before they start." She paused. "I'm not very good at waiting." He was quiet for a long moment, then almost to himself, "No, I can see that." March came in cold and then, partway through, turned. The frost broke on a Wednesday. Sylvie was in the garden when Mrs. Tilley came to the door and called her to say that Mr. Whitmore's carriage was on the lane, which was unusual because he had come only 4 days ago and had said nothing about returning so soon. She was kneeling in the south bed, which is where he found her. She had seen them when she came out in the morning, the first green tips, breaking the surface of the soil, scattered across the dark earth of the bed, more of them than she had expected. She had been clearing the winter debris from around them when she heard his footsteps on the path. She looked up. He was looking at the bed, at the green tips coming up through the cold soil, small and definite and present. He had the expression of a man who has received something he was not sure he was still allowed to want. She got to her feet. She was wearing her work coat, which was not presentable, and her hands had dirt on them, and she did not apologize for either. "You came back early," she said. "I know." He was still looking at the tulips. "I didn't want to miss them." She did not say anything to that. She turned back to the bed and resumed clearing the debris from around the new growth, and after a moment she heard him move. And then he was beside her, kneeling in the dirt in his good coat, without apparent concern, pulling dead leaves away from the stems, with the careful hands of someone who had done this before. They worked without speaking. The morning light came across the garden wall at a low angle, the way late winter light does, and turned everything it touched the color of old gold. After a while Hugh said, "My mother wants to know when you'll come to the city. When would suit?" "She's asking when it would suit you." Sylvie looked at him. He was still looking at the garden, but there was something at the corner of his mouth that was almost a smile, something she had not seen before, small and careful and entirely real. April, she said, after these are properly up. He nodded once. April. The word settled between them, easy and unhurried, like the first warm day after a long winter. Not a promise exactly, but close enough to one that it held.